Welcome to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Anthony C. Ferrante is an American filmmaker, director, and writer, best known for being the man behind the Sharknado franchise. In addition to Sharknado 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, Anthony has directed such horror hits as Boo, Forgotten Evil, and Zombie Tidal Wave. Anthony talked a lot about Sharknado, as well as how he's able to make his sets an unbelievably fun experience that attracts his cast and crew to constantly want to work with him. This is a real art, particularly when you're working with low budgets, which all of the Sharknado movies were on. But Anthony has a lot to say on the topic of making your sets enjoyable. So we get some tips on that, we discuss COVID-era filmmaking, and hear more about what he has in store next. All of this and so much more on today's episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Now, please give it up for Anthony C. Ferrante. So you're in post at the moment. What are you working on, if you're allowed to disclose it?
Yeah. No, I was working on a thriller that we filmed in December called Another Mother, which I'm not sure if that's going to be the final title. And we wrapped, and we're kind of knee deep in post editing and all that stuff. And then the quarantine happened, and so thankfully and strangely, we were right at the cusp of being able to kind of finish things post wise. So a lot of it was the music and the ADR and some of that stuff.
Gotcha.
I think like about a week before, being quarantine happened here, we'd finished ADR on some of the lead actors. And then we kind of did unorthodox stuff for the remaining people for various lines and stuff, which I'll say, surprisingly enough, we found that using the iPhone's microphone and keeping it away from your mouth, keeping it away from your body, you can actually replace lines pretty well.
Oh, wow.
So we did a little bit of that. I ended up kind of cutting a little bit of it in just to make sure, because I was compiling the stuff from all my actors so I can give to the sound people, and the stuff kind of synced up okay. I was actually pleasantly surprised.
Oh, well, that's good.
And of course, composers can work from home, so that's not a problem. And the visual effects guys, so, and then there's a new program called Frame.io or Frame.io. It's instead of being in a screening room reviewing the final version of the film, Frame.io allows you to view the film, and as you see something to correct, you make a note on there, and it creates a note on the side and takes you directly to the time code. So if it's a note for sound or VFX or color, they can directly kind of go 0, 1, 2, 2, 4 for whatever it is. And then all the producers and myself and the post team can see what the issues are.
Oh, that's great.
So that was that actually made things a lot easier. Though I do miss sitting in the screening room listening to the film, with full blast sound. But it's those little shortcuts you kind of have to kind of take into consideration for where we're at right now, and we got through it. And I'm grateful we got everything that we needed.
Yeah, it seems like this time period is going to enable a lot of productions to be able to do a lot more things remotely, with virtual editing rooms and stuff like that. And the fact that you can visually annotate a movie is pretty cool.
Yeah, we did that initially. We used the company I work with. They used Frame.io for when I was editing the film, so I would get notes from them via Frame.io. And that made it easier as opposed to getting approximately 0, 1, 2, 2, whatever, because sometimes we go, well, wait a minute, what are they talking about? Which, you get right exactly where it needs to be. That's the other thing that's going to be interesting too, is like a lot of these news shows and talk shows and stuff are doing all this stuff remotely for probably pennies. And so it's like, you wonder how many shows might actually kind of veer into that direction just as a cost saving method down the road, seeing how efficient they can with, reduced crew.
Yeah, it's going to shift a lot of industries. I mean, I think commercial real estate is going to go down substantially because a lot of companies are seeing that they can do so much remotely that they don't necessarily need to have all the overhead and all of the office space, and they can have remote workforces. And I mean, I think it's definitely going to irrevocably change a lot of industries, because we're going to see what we can do with remote workforces and stuff like that.
Well, I also think that the other thing that's going to be great for when this is when it's safe to go back out there and make movies is that the independents and the people first starting out, there's actually going to be more opportunities, because there's going to be a lot of figuring out the nuts and bolts on a studio level to ensure everything is airtight, safe, and all of that. Because they have and employ upwards of 200, 300 crew members on a show. But a low-budget film could be anywhere between 10 to 25 people. Mm-hmm. And you could safely isolate people. You could safely come up with stories that maybe only involve one or two actors. And I think that the real boon for entertainment at that point will be initially from these places that can kind of, get on the motorcycle and go, as opposed to being the tank of the studio system, which needs a lot of gas to get up and running. Yeah. And I think you'll also see a lot of clever things that the independents do to kind of, figure out the safety practices and the things that are necessary. I mean, we were about to start a production on a movie in April, and a lot of things that we discussed were the two big ones were craft service and catering, because craft service is like the petri dish of scurvy. Right. No one at this stage of the game, we should not even be touching that. But we started thinking, well, what if we find out what everybody likes? They get their little bag lunch at the beginning of the day, handled by one person that puts them in a bag, and that's their craft service for the day. And the catering and stuff would have to be meals that are pre-prepared. There certainly you could do things with long lenses, if you needed to do close-ups and you wanted over the shoulder. But the thing that scares me, though, is that, stuff that we're getting used to about not touching people, whatever, is that we're going to go through a period of movies where it's like nobody hugs or kisses or the intimacy in movies will be gone. So the only thing that you really got left is probably hardcore action and, get away from me. I don't like you.
Yeah, it's strange to even watch movies where you see people eating in restaurants and people hugging and shaking hands. It's like, wait a minute, aren't we not supposed to do that? So as far as your film history, Sharknado obviously has a major pop culture status. And I mean, in the context of all of the other movies that sci-fi was putting out, like Sharktopus and the other movies of that ilk, what do you think it was about your franchise that stood out and got such a strong pop culture sense of status and following?
We've thought about that, and we've been asked that a lot. I think there's a handful of things. I think over the course of whatever it was, maybe 10, 15 years, they were doing that Saturday night movie. The odds of something breaking at some point was about to, that thing was about to happen. Right. I mean, they do like 250, 300 movies. One of them's going to kind of click on a bigger level. But I think there was a lot of things and a lot of factors that happened, and I can't say that one over the other ensured that this happened. I think it was just like all of them combined, and maybe things that we're not even thinking of. But number one, you had actors that normally weren't in these type of movies. Mm-hmm. You had John Hurd, who was our first big get, then Tara Reid and Ian Ziering. And so you had a cast that wasn't overexposed with these type of movies that was like, why are they in this movie? and so that was part of it. The trailer that we did, there was a sci-fi trailer, but Asylum had done a trailer for Sharknado that was for their DVD sales. And normally they're supposed to put the trailer out after the movie airs. And I said, this trailer is too good. Can't we just convince Sci-Fi to let us put the trailer out? And they go, fine. And so Sci-Fi was fine with that. And we put that out, and you looked at the trailer and you're going, I think audiences are like, we're daring them to see how much of what we shot was only in the trailer, and that was it. Right. And of course, there was like 10 times more craziness that was also on screen.
Right. Which, in the spirit of exploitation movies, usually the movie doesn't even fulfill what's on the poster, historically.
Exactly. The other thing was that Sharknado meant a lot to me because I was doing a lot of horror stuff for Sci-Fi. I was writing a lot of scripts. I'd previously done a couple other horror films, Boo and Headless Horseman. And I was pitching a lot of stuff to them as a writer. So they always were looking at me as the horror guy. And so Jacob Hare, a friend of mine who I've written a few scripts with, we go, okay, let's come up with the two most ridiculous titles possible. So I'll send them the horror pitches, but let's come up with like stuff that's outside of the box. And I think one of them was Lava Birds, and the other one was Sharknado. And when he said Sharknado, I'm going, that I love that title. And we kept talking about it, and it just made us smile. And I wrote a reference to Sharknado in a script I wrote for Sci-Fi for Leprechaun's Revenge, which I think is called Red Clover on DVD now. And someone at the network saw that reference, and they're going, we now must make this movie, even though we'd pitched it twice before, because they saw it in paper and writing, like in another script. They just went, we got to do this. And Asylum was tasked with trying to figure this out. And I had just done a film there called Hansel and Gretel. And they, I found out that they were doing that. Well, that's kind of our movie. And they said, look, we'll talk to Sci-Fi about getting you on as director. And Sci-Fi initially said, he's the horror guy. He doesn't know how to do action or visual effects.
Oh, God.
And I thought that was kind of funny. And so, but Asylum pushed for me to do it. And when I got hired, and I said this in jest, and this was always, you say things silly, and I wasn't serious about it, but I was saying, well, if they didn't think I could do this, then I'm gonna go out and make the most ridiculous movie, so they can't make another movie after this without them comparing it to Sharknado. And that was a joke. That was no seriousness. It was just sort of like,
But invariably, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And now here's the other thing, too, is I'd worked with a bunch of companies, different companies. There's a whole bunch of vendors that did things for Sci-Fi. So, a whole bunch of them that, that's how they filled the maw. They had 6 of the 7 of these companies. Mm-hmm. And what I would see with some of the scripts that I wrote would be sort of this reluctance to get too ambitious. So it would be like, one of the scripts I wrote, there was a thing on a plane. And it's like, well, we can't afford a plane. So why don't we turn it into a boat? We can't afford a boat. Let's turn it into a car. And then I kept waiting for them to say, let's turn it into a bicycle. And then when they actually did the scene in the movie, the finale, it was someone in a parked car. Seriously.
Oh, wow.
And so no offense to that. It's just that also being a writer and also a filmmaker who directed movies, I knew how you could do those things. But there was afraid that it might, you might break the bank, or it might be too ambitious. The thing that's interesting about Asylum is that Asylum wants to be ambitious. They want to see how far you can push things. And, you look at their scripts and they're like $200 million movies, and they're going, here's 14 days and, no money, go try to make it. So when I got to do Sharknado, they were fine with me being overly ambitious as long as I could do it within the schedule, as long as I could, come in on schedule, on time. And also in post, I got a lot of leeway to go in and do some additional pickups with like GoPros and stuff. And, we didn't get some stuff in the water. So I went out in a wetsuit with one of our actors and filmed a shark fin. And there's some of that shark fin stuff is me with the GoPro.
Oh, wow.
Holding the fin in my hand, chasing the actor, because we never got that stuff during principal because we just ran out of time. And so, as long as we weren't overly spending money, they were fine. And so we just kept hacking away at this movie and adding stuff on top of stuff. And so it became this kind of crazy, insane movie. And Asylum, generally, their humor, they're very reluctant to put humor into these movies, just because they feel like the foreign markets and stuff like that are hesitant. Mm-hmm. But they allowed me a little more freedom on this, which I was surprised as well. Particularly that last scene, the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon one, where he goes into the shark. that was something I was convinced they were going to make me cut from the movie. And there was a half a second where they're going, "Is that a little too much?" And I'm like, "No, it's fine." And of course, that was the image that ended up, being shown in all the trailers. The other factor that I think with Sharknado was there was a summer where there was a lot of depressing movies and a lot of big studio movies that were coming out that were tanking. And here was something that was for free that kind of is sort of family friendly if you really think about it, aside from limbs getting ripped off and sharks biting people.
Other than that.
And so it was sort of a thing where people can just go, look, I don't want to spend $30 at the theater. Let's just watch something at home. And so I think all of that combined, and the fact that Twitter got involved, this was the first kind of communal Twitter movie going experience, and the fans made us, which is what we never forgot during the sixth film. They made us, and we always tried to stay true to the characters, and we always tried to make these movies about the family. The other interesting thing about Sharknado is that there's really no military or scientist floating around. It's an everyman. It's Finn Shepard, this kind of washed up former surfer guy, and I think that was kind of interesting. So I don't know. And there's also, if you really watch the movie, there's a few times where I'm literally talking to the audience. There's the Baz character, who played by Jason Simmons, and they're talking about blowing up taking bombs and putting them in the tornadoes, and literally Baz steps in between them and goes, well, technically this can happen because blah 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 blah. And that's kind of like me stepping in and saying, yes, this is actually possible. So, but we also played it straight. Everybody says these movies are campy, and I think definitely 6 veers into camp a little bit. But camp is everybody's in on the joke. The actors are in on the joke. Filmmakers are in on the joke.
Right.
The only thing that's over the top is the Sharknado. All the characters are acting like they're in a normal movie, and that's what makes it interesting in that respect. So I think it's this weird hybrid movie that, I still, like I said, I don't know why or how it became what it did. I'm grateful. And I think the thing about being a horror guy is that I also like comedy, and I like the fact that we were able to give something to someone that made them happy. There was a person at Comic-Con that came up to us after the movie aired 2 weeks later, and we were doing a signing, and she said, "Thank you for making Sharknado. I've watched it 3 times. It makes me happy."
No.
And so it's kind of like, okay, it's something kind of new. I thought I was going to be scaring people the rest of my life, and now I'm making people happy. There's something wrong here.
Or something very, very right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Evil Dead 2 makes me happy for some reason, so I get it.
Exactly, and there's that kind of spirit of Evil Dead in these movies in a weird way. And the thing that too is that there's so many Easter eggs that I insert there for horror fans that are so buried. But like number 5, we had a whole subplot about Stonehenge, and while they're shining the light in Stonehenge, there's silver shamrock insignias there, and a melted silver shamrock mask is over a skull. So there's like a lot of these little things in there that I do for myself, and if anybody wants to catch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like fun is the key ingredient to the movies and your approach to the movies. And I feel like that makes all the difference. That plus having the actors all play it straight. Because, I mean, when the actors take the movie seriously, then on a certain subconscious level, the viewer takes it just seriously enough to be able to go with it. And I think that makes it so much more fun. Just that slight sense of, I take it seriously to a degree. Otherwise you check out entirely, and it's just camp for camp's sake. I think people are just getting tired of nowadays.
Well, yeah, and I think the other thing that I'm really proud of is that I think I have a record being starting from the beginning of a franchise and being involved in 6 consecutive films as a director, and so that was kind of really interesting because I was able to be the tone filter, and also it was like a TV show in a way because. When we got to the 6th one, there were so many things we wanted to pay off in other movies or echo. And I always knew if and when we were going to end it, that we would go right back to that bar from the first movie. And we were excited because we wanted to get John Hurd back, but then he'd passed the summer before we were going to shoot. And thankfully, his daughter allowed us to use the footage and some other footage from that to put back into the bar. But there's a consistency. There's not a lot of retconning, and even when we had to make adjustments because of certain circumstances, like there's no way we're going to have Dolph Lundgren show up for a whole movie, so we had to kind of do little workarounds to kind of make it work. But I was always cognizant of not being that retcon guy, or hey, that's not accurate with the mythology. there was even one thing too, because we knew there would be time travel in the sixth one when we were doing the fifth one, and one of my rules throughout the course of the six movies was we will never explain why Sharknadoes exist. Yet in the fifth movie, there's hieroglyphics saying Sharknadoes have been around since the beginning of time, and what ultimately it was is because his son went into this vortex and in Time-Nado, he was the one leaving those messages for his father. So it was actually circling around.
Oh.
And so the hieroglyphics in the cave at the beginning of 5, I had the visual effects guys sign it Gil. So if you pay attention, it's actually signed there. So I actually got my way and was still able to mess with the mythology as well.
So many Easter eggs, my God. Well, considering how close you are to the story and to the mythology, after doing 6 movies, the last one of which concluded on a pretty conclusive note, would you ever consider handing the franchise over to another director, hypothetically, if it ever were to come back and do new movies?
You know, I'm very protective of Sharknado. But, you know, look, if someone comes along and they want someone else to do it, sure. But I think that, look, if they came back to me and said, look, do you want to reboot this? Do you want to do something? I'd still be interested because I love that world.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a TV show, you know, like Buffy. I mean, Joss is still very protective of Buffy. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we all kind of went through the producers, the writers, the actors. We went through something communal with this thing that never happens, where we had fans find us. It wasn't marketing. It wasn't, you know, putting it on billboards and commercials. It was just, they found us. So, you know, you're always wanting to protect that thing, you know, to make sure it doesn't veer. And, you know, as long as I can make sure that, you know, I have a little bit of input, or, you know, if possible. If not, you know, maybe it's time for someone else to come up with something that's different.
Yeah.
So, but I've got a lot of bucket list things that have happened with this movie. I got to write the Archie versus Sharknado comic.
That's
I've
right.
written a comic book before, and that was really, really fun. You know, we have sort of a weird kind of theme song that kind of went viral and did well for us. So, you know, and I got to meet a lot of my idols. I got to work with David Naughton. I got to work with Robert Hayes playing a pilot that may or may not be the same guy from Airplane. You know, it's just there's some just great things that came of it.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, when you know, I go to conventions, there's a lot of kids that love these movies. I went to the Shark convention and I was signing posters, and 80% of it were kids that knew these movies inside out. And I was always cognizant of that for all the movies about, you know, kids are watching this thing. So you'll never see people going off into the woods to go have sex and get killed by sharks, because kids, it's sort of kind of got this ADD kind of a attention deficit disorder kind of way of making these movies, where it's like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And kids responded to that. And I, you know, I was a kid watching horror films, and they meant a lot to me. So when I see kids coming out and this had an effect on them, and it sparked their imagination, you know, that kind of feels like, you know, you're paying it forward a little bit, because that's why we all got into this, because we were antisocial or loners, or just were in our own heads, and we found horror movies as sort of an escape. And to be able to get to be a part of this world and to contribute to it it's a gift.
Yeah, and the movies do have a childlike sense of fun that just reminded me of how much fun horror movies were when I was a kid. Because you watch horror movies as a kid, and then you remain a horror fan as you get older, and the movies are still fun, but there isn't quite as much that same sense of wonder and fun that they do have as a child. So it sounds like you really got in touch with your inner child when you were making these movies, and that's partially why they're so much fun.
I think the other thing too, and I've said this to other people as well, is that you know, we're doing a $200 million movie with $1 million,
right?
You know, in 18 days, and so a lot of Sharknado is there's an energy of desperation. Mm-hmm. You know, if like studios, if they have a problem, they can come back and fix it. You know, they could throw money at it. If we have a problem, we have 12 hours and 18 days to make these movies. If we're not shooting those entire 12 hours, we're not going to have a movie. And so when something goes wrong, you have to come up with something on the spot to make it work. And I think it's that I said, that energy of desperation. And I think in Sharknado 2, we were supposed to have 2 garbage trucks and the Statue of Liberty head was rolling down, and this sort of idea of Pong with the two garbage trucks was the idea in the script. But we get on the set that day, and we have an hour, 2 hours with the garbage truck, and they could only afford one garbage truck. And so everything that was scripted had to be thrown out. And on the spot, I literally had to fabricate how this sequence was going to work. And you're throwing out lines of dialogue to the actors. You're getting the pieces, and the scene works. It still works, as but it's not exactly the thing that we wanted. But this thing is fine too. Mm-hmm. But it was because we had no time. We had another one of those instances with Tiffany Shepis on the boat to Liberty Island in number 2. And we could not afford a boat to shoot on, to take our actors, to drive right out in the boat in New York. It was not possible. And so I go, well, we picked the friend up on Liberty Island. We're about a week in the shooting. It's like, what are we going to do? We're just going to have this boat, and we're going to hear people dying on it, and then we're going to come back and say, oh, she died. When we did a scout, the production boat that took us out to Liberty Island, I timed it. And it was like about 15 minutes. And we knew we were going to be up at 4 in the morning. And so I go, well, maybe we'll have enough light. So what I did was, and thankfully the crew was cool and the actors were cool. I said, look, when we get on this boat, I'm going to pull out the camera, and you guys are going to do the scene going to Liberty Island, and we're going to see you guys going out there. So we did that scene going out to the island. And then coming back, we had 15 minutes. We had to do a huge action sequence where they're being chased by sharks, and a shark attacks Tiffany. And I told the actors, just trust me. We're just going to roll the camera, and I'm going to do all these different setups. Just trust me. And we rolled camera, and it's like, okay, everybody run up here. Okay, let me get a close-up. Never been afraid. Okay, now I'm going to go over here and get the sharks coming at the camera. Okay, all right, now get on the ground, Tiffany. Now fall to the ground. Okay, great. All right, now scream, Carrie. Okay, now let's get a close-up of the taser. Okay, now everybody, run out. We did that in 15 minutes.
Whoa.
And one continuous take, about probably 15 to 20 setups. And it was the easiest thing to cut together. And the only thing that we picked up was the close-up shot of the shark rolling off of Tiffany's face with it all bloody. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm saying, the energy of desperation. It's just like there's this thing of like, we just go. And I think and when you say stuff like with movies and that kind of thing that's missing, I think there's this thing where things can be a little too planned. I know Sharknado doesn't have a lot of rough edges, and it's not that we don't want those it's not like we want those rough edges. It's by nature of we're trying to be too ambitious for our budget and time and money and all that. But I think that energy of desperation sometimes brings interesting things.
Yeah.
And when you're given those constraints, sometimes cool things can happen.
Yeah, and I've heard that from other filmmakers that when they have lower budgets, less time, more constraints, that forces them to be so much more creative, and the overall filmmaking process is a lot more fun and just overall more fulfilling because it is just kind of playing on your instincts as a director to solve problems and creatively come up with solutions on the spot, which, I mean, in addition to just sounding like a lot of fun, although I'm sure it has its drawbacks in terms of stress and whatnot, it seems like that's just that is what indie filmmaking is using that energy of desperation to solve problems, to see opportunities in front of you, and to just somehow make the film work.
I did a handful of shorts to help out Dean Devlin on his TV show Leverage. That was in between. That was after Headless Horseman. And what I did was I got to work with Drew Powell, who's since been on Gotham, and Aldous Hodge, who was just in Invisible Man. And what we do is we'd come up with, it was tied into the show, but we'd sit down and we came up with like sort of a loose structure. And then we go out and shoot for half a day, largely improv. And then I would cut it together and make sense of it. And those turned out to be really funny exercises. But what I learned about that was this thing of working with your actors and finding things that aren't there, especially actors that have comedic sensibilities. They could do so much. And I think I brought a lot of that with me onto the Sharknado movies, because we did end up working with a lot of people who were comedians, and that sort of working in the moment and finding that thing in the moment. Oh, hey, here's an idea. Let's throw it out real quick. Let's do it. Let's not overthink it. Let's just make it happen.
To improv.
Improv, controlled improv, maybe. But yeah, it definitely, I think it's definitely an improv, but within like the framework of, yeah, never mind. It's improv. Forget it. I'm not even going to try to go around it. But like Judah Friedlander, we had in 2 and 6, and Judah makes me laugh so much. And his sense of humor, it's very dry, and it's very, very much similar to my sensibility. And we were out freezing cold in Romania, and he's supposed to explain time travel to Finn. And it was just like, oh, that's the thing about time travel. And it's like, well, that's not enough, Judah. It's like, yeah, okay, what do we do? I was like, what about it's just something like, time travel is like here or there. It's like, sometimes you're stuck in 1955. Let's do a Back to the Future reference. And so he thinks about it for a second. And I go, okay, roll. So we roll. And it's one of my favorite lines in the movie goes, that's the thing about time travel, Finn. Sometimes you're here, sometimes you're there. Sometimes you're stuck in 1955 and by 1955, your mom's trying to make out with you at the Enchantment of the Sea dance. And he just rolled that off his tongue like it was scripted. And it's funny. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like there's a real magic there. And I mean, as far as improv, to me, it feels like it's largely a lost art, because when you look at movies like Ghostbusters, I think one of the reasons that movie still holds up so well to this day is those guys all had improv backgrounds, and their on-screen chemistry was so fluid and so good because they were able to embrace, every single moment that came up while filming. But extrapolating that improv sensibility into filmmaking it is particularly in the context of indie filmmaking with low budgets, right? Like having that sense of and getting a crew on board with all of that. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. How are you able to? I mean, when it comes to that energy of desperation, how are you able to either find a crew who can roll with that sensibility, or how are you able to get your crew on board with that sense of, okay, just trust me, I know what I'm doing, I don't want to explain everything, but just go with me? Because it sounds like it's the sort of thing where you need to have everybody having that same mentality.
Well, I think what it is, and I think you look at a lot of filmmakers that utilize the same people over and over again, like Carpenter and Spielberg. Carpenter used a lot of the same DPs. Spielberg used DPs, editors, people that he's worked with over and over and over again. And I think part of it is getting that core that understands it. I think particularly in the case of Sharknado, I was the only one that kind of knew that what I was trying to do. And the only other person that did understand it was surprisingly John Hurd. He goes at the last day of shoot, he came up to me and he said, I know I could be a little grumpy, but I think there's some kind of method to your madness, because I think there's something here. He kind of sensed there was something about Sharknado, which I'll always be indebted to him for having that faith that there was something here. And a lot of the stuff too, the actors, a lot of the actors in that movie, Ian and Tara and Cassie, had never done visual effects before, and I had done a little bit of it, but so I was having to basically explain what was going on. And at a certain point, I started acting it out, and I would raise my voice and go, and the sharks are coming and they're flying over there. Okay, Todd, do this. So you have a lot of takes where I'm yelling over the camera, trying to kind of create that energy. And then I did that a couple times, and I go, okay, they got it. And then they're like looking at me the next time, like, aren't you going to do that again? I was like, okay. So I would keep doing that. So when we got to the second movie and it worked, you had someone like Ian who was like telling the other actors that were new on the show, just trust the process. We've done this before, and there's a way for this to happen. I've used the same AD. I used the same DP on 3 of the Sharknado movies. The more people that you work with, the core, the better they understand it, particularly your AD. Mm-hmm. Esther Johnson, who I've worked with a lot, is my first AD. she understands my madness.
Right.
she maybe not like it all the time, but she understands the madness. So she'll enable me to do to basically hang myself if need be on these shows. But a lot of times though too, it's within the takes, it's within the moment. I don't really like being an actor, even though I've kind of done a tiny bit of that. But what I like is getting really good actors that I could feed off of.
Right.
And so a lot of times when in the moment you're watching something and you're going, God, it would be great if this person just did this. And so right after we're done, I won't yell cut. I'll go, just do it again and add this line, or just do that. Because on low budget, if you yell cut, you're kind of done. You know, you have to move on. But if you're still rolling a little bit, you can maybe sneak something else in.
Right.
And especially if your actors are good at this, that's actually the key. And we had a great group of actors on these movies that just were able to roll with the punches. Because the one thing that would happen is if you couldn't roll with the punches, you'd be left on the cutting room floor. And there's a lot of supporting people or people that came in that we thought were going to do really great that they just couldn't roll with it. And so they would end up on the cutting room floor just because we don't have time for this.
Right,
and
right.
We got to the fifth and sixth movies. We had 2.5 hour cuts of these movies, and we had to cut it down to 85 minutes. So that means that everything's super tight. So we shot a lot in a short amount of time. We got really good at it, but it is stressful beyond belief.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, I mean, I can't seem to gravitate away from the idea of the energy of desperation because, again, I feel like it's such an important concept for indie filmmakers, particularly with their first few films, to embrace. But when it comes to that, and when it came to your first few movies, and you're working with low budgets, and there is that energy of desperation, how are you able to keep the filmmaking experience so much fun? Because it sounds like such a blast, whereas easily being under conditions where it's very low budget and everything is go, 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 in some cases, some people could consider those to be the conditions for a hellish set or a difficult set. But there's also on the inverse side of that, there is something just unbelievably infectiously fun about that energy of finding a way to get things done. So how are you able to make the distinction on set and keep morale high, and not only high, but keep people having so much fun on these sets that are, possibly considered grueling or difficult or tight conditions?
You try your best you try your best to understand that everybody's doing a job, and you can get frustrated at times or whatever. But the thing is that everybody's working together for the same goal, and I think that part of that is that a lot of people that come out of film school, they, some people are lucky and they get their first big movie and they don't have to kind of go up the ranks and see exactly what everybody does. But I think there's something to be said for having to actually been a crew member. Before I got my first film, I'd done my short films, but I was a special effects supervisor. I was a PA. I worked with, props and costumes and makeup. And so I understood what the departments did, and I understood what could and couldn't be done. So, instead of coming out on set and going, I want this gigantic eyeball made in 15 minutes and you better have it now or I'm going to yell at you. Instead, it's like, I need something like a gigantic eyeball. What can you do for me? What do you have? And you work with people, and then you get a little bit more out of the situation because, you're understanding what everybody's time is. When I did Boo, my first movie, having been on the makeup effects side of things, we hired Kevin Wasner, who's went on to work with KNB on Walking Dead, and he's an amazing artist. And I told my AD, I go, look, if Kevin says it's going to take 3 hours to do this makeup, then we're giving him 3 hours. Yeah. So don't try to rush him. Build it into your schedule so he has the time to do it correctly. And that's what we did on that movie, and it worked out really well. So, we did this Zombie Tidal Wave movie in Thailand, and our effects guys had to go through tons of zombies, but I knew they could only get through so many in a day. So we had to kind of prioritize our schedule and work around that. So there are things that you can legitimately get upset about, but I'd say 90% of the stuff on a set is life's too short. Right. I'm not saying that you don't get frustrated. I'm not saying you don't get angry about things, but it needs to be justified. Because otherwise you're on a tense set and then no one wants to work on it.
Right. Seems like a real fine balance.
It is, and it's like I said, it's understanding what everybody does. I think is key. I mean, I'd edited a lot of my short films, so I kind of understand what I sort of need sometimes. Sometimes I'll overshoot, but I also know when I have it and when I don't. I think that helped me out a lot. And I've only edited 2 of my features, but I have, played around in the edit on all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I, when I'm on set, I know, okay, look, master, you get your master. As long as you get one good version of it, that's fine. If things get screwed up, then you move in medium, close up. But coverage is king. So don't do 4 takes of medium and 4 takes of close up. Do your wide, do your medium, and get in for the close up. And then if you have time, maybe you get another shot.
Right.
I think the biggest mistake that's made, I've seen this happen on second units sometimes when I've sent someone out to do second unit. They'll go and they'll shoot the same angle of the same thing. I'm like, why didn't you move it around? It's easier, if you do that, then I have more options than the same thing that you did 10 times. We're on a unit, we can only do 2 takes per setup. So, so those are the things that you kind of start thinking about when you do things. If you the knowledge is power.
Right. And it's largely about understanding what everybody does, so you can probably properly communicate with them and have a set that all just kind of works harmoniously together.
The hardest thing on Sharknado for me was learning about what visual effects can and cannot do. And because I come from practical, you'll see there's a lot of practical stuff in the first movie that is whenever possible, because I didn't know what we were capable of. So as they progressed, I knew what they were really good at and what they could do really well. And I think that that helped out, because now I can look at shots and I can basically see the visual effect. I can go, okay, we chop off this, we chop off that, we do this, and you kind of understand the framework. On that first movie, it was all a learning curve. To the extent of, wanting to do things practical, one of the things we did, I know we keep going back to Sharknado. Hopefully this is interesting to people.
Absolutely.
But we had the house set in the film. Now, again, we're a low budget movie, and there's a house set that's supposed to get flooded. So we go, well, why don't we build this set in an empty swimming pool and then flood the pool? It's insane what we were doing. So our art department started building this set. And let's talk about sorting through things. Our poor production designers team bailed on him and failed to finish the set. And we go out there and we're supposed to shoot, and I'm looking at the set and it's just half done. It's not even painted. Then it's supposed to have the stairwell, and it was just a mess. And he's going, I'm sorry, man. They just left, and I get it. So I told my AD, look, I'm going to go into the trailer and figure out what and how we could shoot with what's there. Just get them to fix it. And so he in 2 hours, he painted it, made it work. And we shot in a freezing cold January Los Angeles, this set that was flooded with water, and it looks like a house. And there's certain angles, if you really look at it, we couldn't go up. We couldn't really shoot up, so we're sort of this weird medium kind of, because some of the set was like again, I don't know what his team was doing, but it was just weird kind of configuration. So, but he made it work. And we actually had a practical shark in there, and we used some digital stuff, and we got what we needed, but it's tactile and it worked. And I think that's kind of the sometimes fun part about this stuff of again, working with the people you have. We could have just gotten really upset with our production designer. We just, okay, what can we do? How do we make this happen?
Right. So with a background in practical effects and with all the practical effects that were in Zombie Tidal Wave, are you gravitating towards doing more practically with your movies nowadays?
It depends on the movie. Zombie was definitely an attempt to do as much old school horror stuff as possible. I mean,
Fulci style.
Yeah, I mean, I told Ian, like, when people are getting bit, I'm gonna have blood spraying out of their arteries. I mean, and we can pull it back in the edit, but I'm shooting as much of it because I don't really like digital blood. We did use digital blood in Sharknado, but it works and it's necessary. We didn't have time, and that works. But we did do some blood on Sharknado. It's just most of it ended up being toward the latter part of it digital. But on Zombie, it's like I don't want to do digital blood, and I think there's only maybe 10% of the movie has digital blood. which is, and I don't even think you can identify it because it's buried within it. But it takes time, and that's the other thing too. It's like whenever you have to do blood gags, there is a process, and you're only going to get so much. So you got to really pick and choose those moments. We had this head that in the film where this back of this guy's head gets bitten off, and it's just blood's going everywhere. It's this huge chunk. And we submitted to the network like the goriest version of this movie that within the parameters of what we had. And with the thinking of like what they did in the 80s, they would come back, standards and practices would go, okay, pare this back. So we had more blood in there than we really wanted. And they go, oh, everything's fine.
Oops.
So we actually pared it back, so you didn't see that extra, hose spray that makes it look fake. So things have changed a lot since then. But yeah, no, I much prefer the practical side of things. But when you're dealing with sharks, it's just you're better off doing it digitally.
Right.
So
unless you want to go all open water style and use real ones, which I don't know if anybody would recommend that.
No, that there were times like we would always kind of tempt fate. We're going, hey, we know somebody that can cage dive. Let's go actually create a scene. Everything would always come about those movies of like, hey, we have access to this. Why don't we do this? And so there was this moment where it's like, hey, Ian, would you get in a cage? Nope. Okay. All right. So it's not going to happen.
No real sharks. Sounds like a good ground rule to have.
Well, I think since we did these movies, I don't think it's a very smart thing for us to be around real sharks. I don't think it would go well for any of us.
Makes sense.
Today's episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show is brought to you by Rue Morgue Magazine. Subscribe to Rue Morgue for award-winning insight into the world and culture of horror, from books, movies, and comics to music, collectibles, and classics, featuring the latest film, book, comic book, music, game, toy releases, and more delivered to your door. Guillermo del Toro called it the best damn magazine in the genre. Subscribe to Rue Morgue, the horror magazine of the 21st century, by visiting www.rue-morgue.com. Attention to all you New York listeners, the beloved comic book shop Forbidden Planet is in trouble in the wake of COVID-19. After months with zero revenue coming in and massive expenses going out, rent, utilities, and other bills have added up very quickly. The cost of doing business in New York City is astronomical, especially in a ground floor location off of Union Square. I grew up going to this place and could always find whatever my nerdy heart desired at Forbidden Planet, whether it was issues of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac or a rare Todd McFarlane Movie Maniacs action figure. Forbidden Planet had it and gave me the opportunity to hang out with members of my own tribe. I still go to this place and still get super excited every time I walk through their doors. Their staff is unbelievably nice and knowledgeable, and I always walk out with some awesome new discovery. Seriously, this is a magical place, and it breaks my heart that they're in trouble. The owners are dedicated to ensuring that their staff has a job waiting for them when the quarantine is lifted, and because of that, they need your help and have started a GoFundMe page. Just Google Forbidden Planet GoFundMe and you'll find it. Luckily, Forbidden Planet has been able to reopen their doors, so if you're in the New York City area or planning a visit, make sure you go there. Damn the man, save the planet. Please give if you can, and if you can't, please share the campaign.
So last few questions. It seems like you have a real formula that you have perfected throughout all of these movies with low budget, super high concept, very, very fun sensibility behind them. Do you have aspirations to be, in a producer context, kind of a Roger Corman / Jason Blum figure and kind of franchise this formula for filmmaking out?
It just depends. I mean, I produced a film a couple years ago called Awaken the Shadow Man with some really great people, and that was fun to do. But it just depends on the project. Creating an empire of low budget films. I like making the movies. I enjoy that process. And if it's something that I'm busy and I can't do, and it's something I really care about that I want to get involved in, I'd be happy to do it. But it just helping other people out and doing that on occasion, I don't have a problem with it, but I'm more interested in trying to create films that I really want to make and work with the people that I really want to work with. I have like a handful of scripts we've been trying to get off the ground for a very long time that I'd love to see have the light of day. One of them called Agony, which we almost shot 2 years ago, and then we were going to shoot in April until the quarantine happened. We were supposed to shoot in Romania, and it was a limited location thriller, snowbound thriller. But I think the thing that I've learned with Sharknado is that I like different things, and what it's allowed me to do is it's allowed me to kind of experiment as a filmmaker, even in short form. I was hired to do a bunch of energy drink commercials that had dancers in it, and I love music. So that was sort of a challenge to do something outside my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And because of Sharknado, people sometimes send me comedy scripts, and I like comedy. So I mean, I'm a genre guy, and I'll always be a genre guy. But I like the fact that I get to branch out. Did this Forgotten Evil movie a couple years ago, this thriller that is kind of different than a lot of stuff I've done, but it also has a lot of other cool things in it that I'm surprised we got away with. So, and I've also really enjoy working with actors, especially ones that, are willing to play with that sort of that improv thing that we talked about. An example on Forgotten Evil, one of the things I was trying to do is, it's a relationship thing that was happening between the two characters. And I wanted to do a karaoke scene because I wanted to have this song. This woman has amnesia. She starts remembering things. And we're low budget, so you can't really license great songs, or you can't license songs that everybody knows. Robbie Rist and I write a lot of the songs for these movies under our band name Quint. So we wrote a song and we karaokeized it. And I played it for the actors once. And they go, well, we want to learn it and practice it. Like, no, that's not the idea of karaoke. We're going to play it live, and you're going to sing it live. And they were terrified. But that one scene is probably one of my favorite scenes in all of my movies, and that they're up there doing it, struggling through it, but there's this infectious quality to this couple trying to kind of do this song together. And that's the kind of stuff that's fun when you can get that and capture that on film, because it's not a pre-recorded track. And those are the kind of things of trying to find spontaneity that isn't in a controlled situation. And in that same film, there's a scene outside this hospital where that same guy is talking to the girl, and spoiler alert, he's the killer. But she gets his phone number, and I go, Kyle, I want to write something on this thing. And I wrote something on it, and then Maciela came up to Kyle going, write something really sweet on the note for me. So I was like, oh, it's perfect, because I'd already written something on there. And so in the take, he hands her the phone number, and she looks at it, and she starts breaking, but she stays in character. So it comes off as her being giddy and kind of like, oh, I'm in awe of this guy. But what I wrote on there is, I'm going to kill you. But there's this, again, she stayed in character. And it's that little bit of authenticity. Yeah. That I think that's one of the things that more movies need to strive for. And you see it a lot in Marvel. There's that authenticity. You have people committing to that and making it feel real and natural. And regardless of being horror or not, it's finding those honest moments. Those are the things that people remember. People will always remember Raiders of the Lost Ark, Harrison Ford shooting the guy with the sword.
Right. Which was not scripted.
It was in the moment because he had diarrhea.
Yep.
No one would have known it, but they thought that is the funniest thing. That is the greatest thing ever. And so, as a filmmaker, and I think for other filmmakers out there, it's great to have blood, gore, and guts and all that stuff. But it's finding those characters, finding those moments, because if you can care about your characters and you can find that authentic stuff, then people are going to be attracted to it. Which is, again, going back and talking about Sharknado, is like people like those characters. Yeah. And we never betrayed them. And whenever we got a script that came in and there was something that, no, Finn doesn't do that. No, Nova doesn't do that. We've always stayed true to those characters, and that's why people followed them for the 6 years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there was something very magical about those moments of, I keep going back to improv for lack of a better term, but where people are able to remain in character but do something off that's not in the script. And I feel like the the way they're able to do it is by knowing their character so inside and out, so that they can react in the moment as their character, and that just breathes life beyond the script. And yeah, like you said, it's caused some of the most memorable moments in cinema history.
Well, like you said, Bill Murray. I mean, Ghostbusters, Meatballs, Stripes.
Yep.
I mean, it's Bill Murray doing all that stuff. And
right.
You know that a lot of it just comes, it just pops out. And, he had a great collaborator with Ivan Reitman. And that's how you get those moments. And, and I said, Marvel does that really well because they have people like Downey and Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd is another one of those guys that I think just, something comes up and he just goes with it.
Yeah.
So, and, for a while there, Seth Rogen, those movies did a lot of that as well.
Oh yeah, totally. Like Knocked Up, I think to this day is still one of the funniest movies in a long time. Did you see the Bill Murray Stories documentary on Netflix?
No.
It's great.
Yeah?
It's really, yeah. I mean, you know what it's about, right? All those kind of, all these people have these obscure stories about Bill Murray showing up in a bar and showing up at like obscure house parties in South Carolina. And there's all these people who have these just wonderful stories where Bill Murray just walks in and out of their lives and just totally brightens their day. But by doing the most obscure things, it's wonderful. But it has these kind of deeper, farther reaching philosophies of Bill Murray. And it all goes back to improv too. The whole movie just kind of brings a full circle about improv. It's a real fun watch. Yeah. I think it's called the Bill Murray Stories. And it's an image of Bill Murray as Bigfoot. yeah, definitely recommend it.
He's the bucket list. I mean, we always kept saying, I think in the third movie we wanted him to be president. It was like, you know how difficult it is to find him, and also on our budget and low budget and how fast we move. If we even got him to show up, we'd probably be done filming and the movie would have been out by the time he showed up.
Yeah,
but.
Yeah, they struggle to get him on Ghostbusters 3. He's elusive, but there's an 800 number that you have to call, and everybody has to call that number to get, no matter, it could be Spielberg,
Well, but I was actually thinking, we were thinking like, okay, well, do you remember the Saturday Night Live sketch that Lorne Michaels did way back in the early days, where he wanted the Beatles, so he was going to offer them like $500 to split between them if they got together? Do you remember that at all?
No.
Okay, it was this thing, that they were like, it was just them being silly, and I'm going, okay, we should just do a video, and we offer Bill Murray $500, however he wants to spend it, and do it in that thing. Maybe that would get his attention, but we just never had time. By the time we started shooting, we started shooting these things usually February. We edited it and delivered it in July of that year. They were insane movies to do.
Yeah.
So, but
it's not too late. He could be the president of Zombie Tidal Wave 2.
Yeah, there's a Zombie Tidal Wave 2. I think that I think it would be, yeah, but he's already done the zombie thing, so it wouldn't.
Oh, that's right. He's done it twice actually. He shows up at the end of Zombieland 2. Well, Anthony, this is a whole bunch of fun. I really appreciate your time. So thanks a lot. This was a blast. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any parting advice for those aspiring filmmakers out there?
There's a couple things I always tell people. One of them is just be aware that you're in a movie industry and everybody has an agenda. You just have to hope their agenda is your agenda. Mm-hmm. So if it's like, hey, I want a movie and everybody is on the movie wants to make a great movie, you're going to make a great movie. But you just have to be aware that, some people are just in it to, that's just a job, and so you have to understand that and respect that. Some people really want to do something great. Learn every department, even just a little bit. Try to understand how things are done. I learned this visual effects program called Shotgun, which allows us to see visual effects early and make notes. And when I went on to Zombie Tidal Wave, I ended up helping out a lot because I had been through that process. And so I was able to drop shots in and then make notes for the animators that were very precise because I knew exactly what was wrong with the shot. Like, we need 4 extra frames here. You missed this, so that was just because I learned that program. And then the other thing is, I think at the end of the day is do things that mean something to you, that you're behind, whether it's something you really want to scare somebody or you want to make someone smile. when you can latch onto those things and find those things that connect to you, you're going to make some interesting projects, because it's very easy to make movies now. Anybody can pick up a camera and do it. So the stuff that resonates is the stuff that means something to you. And horror movies, as we know, are a great way to hide things and ideas that you couldn't necessarily do in a drama, but in a horror film.
Right.
You could disguise metaphors and do things that can make it even deeper. And that's one of Cronenberg did that a lot. There's a lot of amazing stuff. And then the final thing, and I've said this before too, is when you go out on set, make a decision. Like whether it's a right decision or a wrong decision, you could always say later, I was wrong, but you just have to make decisions. You don't have a lot of time. Time is money on these things. And if we're going to get into a situation now where we're going to have to start, testing people for fevers and sanitizing and all that stuff. If you have 12 to 14 to 15 days to make a low budget movie, and now you're going to add that on top of it, which is going to be necessary, you're going to lose an hour and a half of your day. And they're not going to give you 5 or 6 extra days to do this. You're going to have the same amount of time, but you're going to have the same amount of days, just less time. So making decisions are really important, and going, okay, this is what it is. There are times when you have something in your head and you go, look, I really want it this way. And then you got to also realize you're not going to be able to get it that way, and you're going to have to kill your baby. Mm-hmm. And I've said that on sets before. Even this last movie, I had this shot that I really wanted to do for this opening, and the idea was we had a crane. We're going from a window, and we're panning down. We're hearing an argument from a couple. We go past the window. We see them arguing. He grabs his child, and they come out the door. And basically, as they come out the door, then the jib goes right into the woman, and then that's our cut. We had our house. Everything was great. We knew what we were going to do. And at the last minute, the people that we were going to rent the house from couldn't do. So they had to find another house. And the house had all these power lines right there, which you can't have the jib on. And there was no real window where they could be at in the upstairs to get them down. And so I was sitting there just like, I was irritated because I had exactly what I wanted. But I also knew what ultimately was going to happen, which was just, we're going to have to kind of do it just on the bottom, on the front. Maybe we'll do it with the jib. And I kept thinking about it, and then my DP came over to me and goes, look, I can do this with a steady and get you everything you need. And it's like, I know, let's just do it. But, for a moment there, I needed to stew because I was like, damn it. I wanted my Scorsese shot, and I didn't get it. But you know what? It turned out really good. It was the low budget version of the big budget idea.
Yeah.
And, once you get over it, you can stew for 5 minutes because you can afford 5 minutes while lights are getting set up. And you go, okay, this is what we're going to do. Instead of going, oh, the world's going to end. I'm not doing this. I'm going to be a baby. No, don't do that. Just you got to learn to compromise.
Yeah.
Sometimes within the compromises, great things happen.
Yeah. Well, wise words. On that note, thank you again, Anthony. This was awesome.
No, thank you for taking the time and wanting to talk to me. I appreciate it.
All right. Really enjoyed that conversation a lot. There's so much to think about. So here, as always, are some key takeaways from this conversation with Anthony C. Ferrante. Number 1, embrace the energy of desperation. The Sharknado movies are what Anthony refers to as $20 million movies made for $1 million. When you have a scope that big and a budget so low, every minute on set counts, as does every dollar spent. Collectively, this can cause filmmakers and crew members to scramble and really hustle on sets because time is money. These kind of circumstances and this kind of energy often translates to the movie itself, and it makes for a very interesting and fun kind of energy. Just look at Evil Dead. If they had more money, that movie wouldn't have been what it was. Having less time and less money also forces quick decision making, and this decisiveness will only serve you as a director in the future, given the millions of decisions that have to be made on productions. When big budget films are shot at a slow, lumbering, and comfortable comfortable pace and everything goes smoothly and according to plan, it often translates to a pretty boring movie. Of course, there are many exceptions. But you're an indie filmmaker. Your movies are supposed to feel rough around the edges because they were such a bitch to make. Don't fight this. Embrace it because it will serve your film and give it a noticeable energy. Number 2, sometimes they just gotta trust you. Anthony described a situation on one of the Sharknado movies where he had to improvise a brand new complicated sequence on set because at the last minute, certain important props and centerpieces weren't available. Flying entirely by the seam of his pants, he had to improvise and elaborate an action sequence that he could see in his head, and he had 20 minutes to do it. He went to his actors and simply said, "Trust me and follow exactly what I'm saying." And they worked it out in one shot. Sometimes you're not always going to have time to explain every last detail of every last decision to every single actor in the scene. In order to properly orchestrate what you see in your head, you need to build trust with your actors so they can follow you through it. This often comes with time and definitely has to be earned. Number 3, empathize with your entire crew. When it comes to low-budget movies, there is such a fine line between a fun set and a hellish set. Low budgets, punishing schedules, and grueling elements can either wear everybody down or pump everybody up. Some indie movies are a blast, and people talk about how they were paid next to nothing and they loved every minute of it. When you hear Howard Berger and Greg Nicotero talk about working on Evil Dead, there's a clip where they mention that they were paid $400 a week, but every day felt like summer camp and they would have done it for free. Let's get one thing clear. I am not saying not to pay your cast and crew as well as you can. You always should. What I am saying is that it is part of your job as a director to build a set that people are going to want to come to, partially because you're going to want crew members to become longtime collaborators. Anthony talked about how the key to doing this is understanding that everybody is doing a job and that you have to give them the time, space, respect, and resources to do their jobs. This largely comes down to empathy and understanding what every job on set entails, which is why Anthony always urges aspiring directors to learn as much as they can about these multiple jobs done on set. He actually has worn multiple hats across multiple productions himself, which has always helped him empathize with his crew and run better sets. Will you get frustrated? Will you have to continually inspire your crew? Will you have to remind them that you're running out of time and money? Will you have to crack the whip sometimes? Of course. But there's a conscious and respectful way to do all of these things. Mastering this idea can turn your ragtag indie crew into a community and ultimately an unstoppable force. So make a conscious effort to make your productions an enjoyable and overall positive experience, because it can so easily be the opposite. Anyway, guys, thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you shared it with your friends and family on social media. Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at I'm Nick Taylor and on Twitter at the same handle. Thanks again for listening to The Nick Taylor Horror Show.